Rain fell on the glass dome of the Haven Embassy ship, and Sol and Reva watched the drops slide down like tiny rivers with no direction. It was strange to see natural rain on the outside of a ship's hull. Most worlds Solon had visited kept their ships far from weather, safe in orbit. But the humans of Earth had asked the Haven ship to land in an open field, in the rain, without shields, without walls between them. It was the first sign that something about this species did not match anything in the old reports. Solon was young for a diplomat, only in their second full assignment. But the council had chosen them because of a simple reason. Solon asked too many questions, and questions were exactly what this mission needed. Before leaving the home system, Solon had been called into a private chamber by an elder named Naira Ossel, one of the oldest voices on the council. Naira did not smile often, and she did not smile that day either. "You are going to a world called Earth," Naira had said, her voice low and careful, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "You will meet a species called humans. Do not provoke them. Do not challenge them. Watch, listen, and write everything down. That is your only task." Solon had asked the obvious question. Why? What have they done? Naira had been quiet for a long moment before answering. "Nothing that we can prove. That is what frightens us most." That answer had followed Solon across the stars for weeks, repeating in their mind like an unfinished sentence. The Haven were not a fearful species by nature. They had survived 3 wars with other civilizations, not through strength, but through patience, negotiation, and careful alliances. Haven ships were built for talking, not fighting. Haven cities were open, connected, calm. Fear was not part of their culture. Yet when the subject of humans came up in old council records, even the bravest Haven historians grew quiet. There were old reports, half destroyed or locked away, describing something called the Silence Era. During that time, at least 4 different spacefaring species had sent ships toward the human system to make contact. None of those ships had ever sent back a full report. Some stopped communicating entirely. Others returned with garbled messages that made no sense, talking about music, gardens, and something called barbecues. No records showed proof of any attack. No records showed proof of any danger at all. That was the mystery that had grown into a warning passed down for generations. Fear humans, though no one remembers why. So when the ship finally landed in that open field, with real rain hitting the hull, Solon expected almost anything except what actually happened. A crowd had gathered near the landing site, kept back by a simple rope line instead of armed guards. Some held signs painted with bright colors, words like "Welcome, neighbors," and pictures of stars and hands reaching toward each other. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, straining to see the strange ship descend. When the ramp opened and Solon stepped out into the wet grass, the first sound to reach their ears was not a warning siren or a military command. It was cheering. A woman with short gray hair and a bright yellow coat stepped forward from the crowd, holding a small black umbrella over her head with one hand and reaching out with the other. "You must be freezing," she said, her voice warm and simple, as if greeting an old friend rather than a visitor from another star system. "Come on, let's get you somewhere dry." Solon had prepared speeches. Formal greetings translated carefully into the local language, statements of peace and cooperation between civilizations. None of it seemed to matter here. The woman, whose name turned out to be Dana, simply guided Solon toward a nearby building, chatting the entire way about the weather, apologizing for the rain, asking if Solon wanted something warm to drink. Inside, the building was full of humans moving quickly but calmly, setting up screens, chairs, and strange devices that Solon later learned were called cameras. There was noise everywhere, but it did not feel like chaos. It felt organized in a way Solon had not expected, almost like a well-rehearsed dance where everyone somehow knew their part without shouting orders at each other. Later that evening, alone in a small guest room provided by the humans, Solon opened a personal journal, a task assigned directly by the council. Every entry was meant to be sent back home, unfiltered, exactly as experienced. Solon stared at the blank page for a long time before writing the first line. "I do not understand the warning yet. Today I met a species said to be the most feared in the galaxy, and they gave me tea and a blanket." Solon set the pen down and looked out the window at the rain, now slowing to a soft drizzle over unfamiliar rooftops. Somewhere far away, on quiet paper archives back home, the words of the Silence era still sat unanswered. Something had made 4 different species go quiet after meeting these people. Something had made even the calm and careful Haven whisper warnings instead of asking questions directly. But today, there had been laughter in the crowd. There had been an umbrella held over a stranger's head in the rain. There had been simple kindness, offered without hesitation, without calculation, without any of the careful diplomatic distance the Haven were trained to keep. Solon closed the journal for the night, but one thought stayed, quiet and persistent, like a small stone in a shoe. Kindness like that was easy to offer when there was nothing to fear. But what happened when there was? That question would not be answered for a while yet. For now, there was only the rain, the warmth of the guest room, and the strange, unshaken feeling that everything Solon had been taught to expect was wrong in a way that was somehow even more unsettling than being right. 3 weeks into the assignment, Solon had learned that humans measured danger differently than anyone else in the galaxy. It was not something written in any book. It was something Solon noticed by accident, during a lunch break, while listening to 2 scientists argue calmly about redirecting an asteroid the size of a small moon. The building where Solon now worked was called a research campus, a place where humans from many different fields came together to study the Haven and, in turn, let themselves be studied. Solon had been given a small team to work with directly. A scientist named Rosa who studied languages, a soldier named Petra who handled security, and a quiet young man named Doran who translated cultural terms that did not exist in the Haven language. Together, they were meant to help Solon understand humanity, one ordinary day at a time. It was during one of those ordinary days that Solon first felt real unease, not fear exactly, but a deep confusion that settled into the stomach like cold water. Rosa and another scientist, a tall man with tired eyes, were sitting across the lunch table discussing something they called a deflection mission. Solon listened carefully, expecting talk of some distant, abstract danger. Instead, the 2 scientists spoke about an asteroid currently on a path that could, in about 11 years, strike a populated region of the planet. They discussed velocity numbers, spacecraft designs, and something called a kinetic impactor, all while eating sandwiches and comparing notes as if planning a weekend trip. "You're talking about pushing a moon-sized rock out of its path," Solon said, unable to stay quiet any longer. "Doesn't that frighten you?" The tired-eyed scientist shrugged, took another bite of his sandwich, and said, "We've done it before, smaller ones. This one's just bigger. We have time to plan it right." Solon wrote that exchange down that night, word for word, in the journal. It was such a small moment, barely worth mentioning to most people, yet it revealed something enormous. Humans did not panic at the size of a threat. They calculated it, broke it into smaller pieces, and worked the problem calmly, the same way another person might plan a garden. A few days later, Solon witnessed something even stranger. 2 nations on Earth, called countries in the local language, had a disagreement over a stretch of ocean water rich in fish and other resources. Solon expected slow negotiations, or worse, the beginning of a conflict. Instead, within a single week, the dispute ended. Petra explained it plainly over dinner one evening. "Nobody wants to actually fight over fish," Petra said, cutting a piece of bread. Both sides moved a few ships closer to the area, showed they were serious, then sat down and worked out a deal. "It's over now. Happens more than you'd think." Solon asked why the ships were necessary if neither side wanted to fight. "Because saying you're serious and showing you're serious are 2 different things," Petra answered. "People believe what they see, not what they hear." That single sentence stayed with Solon for a long time. Among the Haven, disagreements were solved purely through talking, meetings, careful wording, endless rounds of discussion until agreement was reached. Weapons were never part of the process, not even as a symbol. Yet here, humans used the shadow of strength calmly, almost gently, like a tool rather than a threat, and then set it aside the moment it had done its job. It was not aggression. Solon began to understand that clearly now. It was something closer to control, a quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly how much force was needed and using no more than that. One evening, walking along a path near the research campus, Solon asked Doran a question that had been building for days. "Are humans afraid of anything?" Doran thought about it for a while before answering. "Sure. Lots of things. Sickness, Losing people we love, running out of time. Just not really other people, or things we can prepare for. If we can plan for something, it stops being scary and just becomes work. Solon wrote in the journal that night under a small lamp, the words coming slower than usual, each one carefully chosen. They are not gentle because they are weak. They are gentle because they have decided to be. Every kindness I have seen has come with a controlled, hidden strength standing behind it, present, but never raised without reason. I begin to suspect the fear the council warned me about is not fear of what humans might do, but fear of how calmly they would do it if they ever had to. Solon paused, pen resting against the page, thinking of the asteroid discussion over lunch. The ships moved quietly into place, then quietly moved away again once their purpose was served. There was a pattern forming, one that no single event revealed on its own, but together painted a picture far more complex than simple aggression or simple peace. Humans were not passive. They were deliberate. And deliberate strength, Solon realized, was far harder to predict and far harder to warn against than a species that simply attacked without thought. The old council records had never mentioned battles or invasions from Earth. Perhaps that silence was not proof of harmlessness. Perhaps it was proof of exactly how carefully humans chose their battles, and how rarely they needed to fight one at all. Outside the window, the campus lights flickered on as evening settled over the research buildings, and somewhere in the distance, laughter echoed from a group of students walking home. Ordinary sounds, ordinary lives, carrying an extraordinary weight that Solon was only beginning to understand. A message arrived late one night, waking Solon from a light sleep. It came directly from the Haven diplomatic ship still parked in the field outside the research campus, and it carried a clearance code Solon had never seen used before. The message was short: report to the ship immediately, alone. Solon dressed quickly and walked through the quiet campus grounds under a sky full of unfamiliar stars, arranged in patterns that still did not feel natural after weeks on this world. The ship's ramp lowered without a sound, and inside, the ship's senior archivist, an older Haven named Cass, waited near a small terminal glowing with soft blue light. You have been granted access to a restricted file, Cass said, without any greeting first. Level 3 archive, sealed since before you were born. The council decided your reports have earned it. Solon sat down slowly, unsure whether to feel honored or afraid. The terminal blinked once, then displayed a long list of file names, dates going back nearly 3 centuries. Cass tapped one near the top, labeled only with a string of numbers and a single word, Thren. You know that name? Cass asked. Solon shook their head. The word meant nothing. They were a species from the outer systems, gone now, mostly, Cass said, settling into a chair beside the terminal. Aggressive by nature, expansionist, always looking for weaker worlds to claim as their own. About 200 years ago, their scouts found Earth. The files opened slowly, translated fragments of old reports, some damaged, some clearly rewritten more than once for clarity. Solon read carefully as the story unfolded across the screen. The Thren had sent a small invasion fleet toward Earth, expecting an easy conquest based on early scans that showed a species still learning to leave its own planet. The fleet entered the system with confidence, weapons ready, expecting little resistance. They found none of what they expected. The records were incomplete, some sections blacked out entirely, but what remained painted a strange picture. There had been no dramatic battle, no destruction of cities, no desperate last stand. Instead, the Thren fleet had simply stopped functioning as a threat within days. Ships were disabled, not destroyed. Crews were captured, not killed. The invasion ended not with fire, but with silence, followed by something far stranger. They rehabilitated them, Cass said quietly, watching Solon's reaction. The ones who survived. Humans studied the Thren, learned their language, learned what drove them to attack in the first place, and slowly, over years, some of those Thren were allowed to live among humans. A few still do, even now, hidden among the human population, their descendants unaware of where they truly came from. Solon stared at the screen, reading the same paragraph 3 times before the meaning fully settled. They defeated an entire invasion fleet and told no one, not even us. They did not conquer for glory, Cass said. They did not even conquer at all, not in the way we understand it. They simply removed a threat, then quietly offered peace to what remained of it. No parades, no warnings sent to the rest of the galaxy, no demands for territory or tribute, as if defeating an invasion was simply another problem to be solved and then forgotten. Solon sat back, the weight of the information settling slowly. Why keep this hidden from the rest of us? Why let the fear grow instead of explaining what actually happened? Cass was quiet for a moment before answering. Because the truth is more frightening than the mystery. Species react in different ways to threats. Some grow desperate and destructive when cornered. Others grow cruel when they win. Humans became patient and generous after total victory, extending mercy without needing to be forgiven for anything themselves. That kind of strength, controlled so completely, following a victory so total, unsettled even our own council. A species capable of complete devastation who chooses restraint afterward is far harder to predict and far harder to prepare for than a species that simply destroys everything in sight. Solon thought back to the lunchroom conversation about the asteroid, calm and calculated. The quiet movement of ships during the small dispute over fishing waters, present just long enough to make a point, then withdrawn without further conflict. Small moments, now connecting into something larger, something the Council had clearly understood long before Solon ever set foot on Earth. They are not gentle because they lack the ability to be otherwise, Solon said slowly, almost to themselves. They are gentle by choice, every single time, even after proving conclusively what happens when that choice is taken away from them. Cass nodded once. That is why we watch, and why we do not provoke. Not because we believe they wish us harm. Because we do not yet understand what would cause them to stop choosing peace, and no species in this galaxy wishes to be the one who finds out by accident. Solon sat in the dim light of the ship for a long while after Cass left, staring at the old files still glowing faintly on the screen. Later that night, back in the guest room at the research campus, Solon opened the journal and wrote carefully, weighing each word. I have learned tonight why the Council fears humans, though fear feels like the wrong word now. It is closer to respect, mixed with uncertainty. They faced true danger once, defeated it completely, and then chose forgiveness over vengeance, quietly, without seeking credit for either. A species capable of such total strength, wrapped so completely in such deliberate restraint, cannot be measured by the same rules that apply to the rest of us. I no longer believe they are simply harmless. I believe they are simply choosing, every day, not to be otherwise. Solon closed the journal, turned off the small lamp, and lay awake for a long time, listening to the quiet sounds of a peaceful campus outside the window, knowing now exactly how much quiet strength that peace was resting upon. The alarm did not sound like anything Solon had heard before, a low pulsing tone that made the walls of the research campus seem to hum. Rosa grabbed Solon's arm mid-sentence, cutting off a conversation about verb tenses, and pulled them toward a hallway already filling with quick, purposeful movement. There was no shouting, no panic, only fast, controlled steps and clipped voices speaking into small devices. What's happening? Solon asked, struggling to match Rosa's pace. Attack on the outpost, Rosa said, her voice tight but steady. The research station out past the North Ridge. We don't know who yet. Solon had visited that outpost twice, a small facility studying weather patterns, staffed mostly by scientists and a handful of security personnel. It was not a military target. It was not important enough, by any normal calculation, to attack. That fact alone made the situation feel far more dangerous than a larger, more obvious target would have. Petra met them at the entrance to the underground transport tunnel, already wearing gear Solon had never seen before, dark and fitted, nothing like the simple uniform worn most days. You're coming with us, Petra said to Solon, not as a question. Command wants you kept close. If this is aimed at the Alliance, you might be the actual target, not the outpost. The transport moved fast through the tunnel, lights blurring past the windows, and Solon's mind raced through possibilities. Could this be Thren survivors, angry after learning their history had been shared with a Haven diplomat? Could this be another species entirely, testing the fragile new alliance between humans and the Council? The answer came only after they arrived, breathless, at a secondary command post near the outpost. A tactical officer, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm, clipped voice, explained the situation quickly. Ships bearing no clear markings had struck the outpost's outer shield, damaging it but not breaching it fully. Communication signals intercepted during the attack used a language pattern belonging to a species called the Corvain, old rivals of the Haven Council, known for manipulation rather than direct conflict. "They're trying to make it look like your people attacked us," the officer said, looking directly at Solon. "Cut the alliance off before it really starts." Solon felt a cold understanding settle in. If humans believed the Haven had launched this attack, the fragile trust built over these past weeks would collapse instantly, replaced by the very fear the Council had warned Solon about from the beginning. "You have to let me speak to your command," Solon said. "Let me help prove this isn't us." Petra shook her head firmly. "Not until we know you're safe. Which means staying with me." The ground shook suddenly, a low tremor followed by a sharp crack somewhere close outside. The Corvain ships, having failed at the outpost, had shifted their attack toward the command post itself, likely realizing a Haven diplomat was present and deciding that capturing or eliminating Solon would cause even greater damage to the alliance than the original attack. Petra moved instantly, pulling Solon behind a reinforced barrier as the ceiling above cracked and dust rained down. Outside, Solon could hear the distant sound of engines, sharp and fast, followed by return fire from human defense systems responding without hesitation or confusion, as if this exact scenario had been planned for long before it happened. A second explosion hit closer, shaking the barrier itself, and for a brief, terrifying moment, Solon expected the worst. Instead, Petra stepped fully in front of Solon, shielding them completely with her own body as debris scattered across the room. It happened without discussion, without any visible calculation, simply an immediate decision made in less than a heartbeat. When the dust settled and the tremors stopped, Petra remained exactly where she had placed herself, checking herself quickly for injury before turning to check on Solon instead. A cut along her arm bled slowly, ignored entirely as she focused on the diplomat she had just protected. "Are you hurt?" Petra asked, her voice steady despite the chaos still visible outside. Solon could barely speak for a moment. Staring at the injury Petra seemed to consider unimportant. "You could have moved somewhere safer. Why protect me instead?" Petra looked almost confused by the question, as if the answer should have been obvious. "You're part of my team. That's what you do for your team." Outside, the attacking ships were already being driven off, human defense forces responding with speed and precision that left little room for the Corvain deception to succeed. Within the hour, evidence had been gathered proving the attack's true origin, and the fragile trust between humans and the Haven, rather than shattering, seemed instead to grow stronger, forged now through shared danger rather than simple curiosity. That night, back in the guest room, Solon sat with the journal open for a long time before writing anything at all. The cut on Petra's arm, bandaged now, had been treated as a minor detail, barely worth mentioning next to the fact that the mission itself had succeeded. Solon thought of the Council's old warnings, the mystery of the Silence era, the careful, distant fear that had followed humanity's reputation across the stars for generations. None of it explained what had actually happened today. None of it explained a soldier stepping between danger and a stranger from another world without a single moment of hesitation or calculation. Solon finally began to write. "They bled for me today. Not for my council, not for the alliance, not for any treaty or agreement written on paper. A soldier named Petra placed herself between me and danger without a single word of explanation beyond the simple fact that I was part of her team. I begin to understand now that human loyalty is not something earned slowly through years of careful diplomacy. It is something given quickly, freely, and completely, the moment someone is welcomed into their circle. That is not the mark of a species to be feared. That is the mark of a species capable of a depth of loyalty most of us have never truly understood." Solon set the pen down and looked at the bandage still visible faintly beneath the sleeve of the jacket hanging by the door, a small, quiet reminder of just how much trust had already been built between two species who, only weeks ago, had known almost nothing about each other at all. The council chamber smelled the same as Solon remembered, a faint scent of cool metal and recycled air, familiar in a way that felt strange after so many weeks spent breathing the open, unfiltered air of Earth. Solon stood at the center of the circular room, facing rows of elders seated in quiet, careful silence, waiting to hear a report that would shape the future of an entire alliance. Naira Ossel sat near the front, her expression unreadable as always, hands folded neatly in her lap. Beside her sat a council member Solon did not recognize immediately, an older man with sharp, narrow eyes named Bryn Talus, known throughout the council as one of its most cautious and most stubborn voices. Solon had prepared carefully for this moment, organizing weeks of journal entries into a clear, structured report. The kindness shown upon first arrival, the calm, calculated strength behind small disputes resolved without violence. The hidden history of the Thren, defeated completely, then treated with mercy rather than vengeance. The soldier who had stepped into danger without hesitation, shielding a stranger from another world simply because trust had already been given. They are not the threat our old records suggest, Solon said finally, finishing the report. They are cautious with their strength, generous with their trust, and remarkably steady even in genuine danger. I recommend the council move forward with full alliance status. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Bryn Talus leaned forward slightly, his voice calm, but edged with something colder underneath. You have shown us kindness, mercy, loyalty. Very touching. You have not shown us anything that explains why 4 separate species went silent after contact centuries ago. Solon hesitated only briefly. The Thren invasion explains a portion of that silence. Perhaps other encounters simply ended peacefully, without further contact needed. Perhaps, Bryn said, unconvinced. Or perhaps those species learned something about humanity that convinced them further contact was not worth the risk, and we are the first foolish enough to ignore that lesson. Naira finally spoke, her voice quiet but carrying easily through the chamber. The fear surrounding humanity has never been about cruelty, Solon. We have faced cruel species before, and we know exactly how to categorize that danger, how to defend against it, how to predict its next move. Humans are different. Their unpredictability comes not from disorder, but from an ability to change faster than any species we have ever studied. Bryn nodded, adding, a species capable of total destruction one century and complete restraint the next cannot be measured by ordinary rules. They adapt. They forgive quickly, yes, but they also escalate quickly when required, and there is no clear line marking exactly where that change occurs. That unpredictability, more than any weapon, is what unsettles even the most experienced among us. Solon thought of Petra, stepping instinctively between danger and a stranger, of the scientists calmly discussing the deflection of a moon-sized asteroid over lunch, of Cass, quietly explaining a 200-year-old secret buried deep in the archive, a fleet defeated so completely it simply vanished from galactic memory rather than becoming a warning to others. Their unpredictability comes from choice, not chaos, Solon said carefully, choosing each word with deliberate care. I have watched them decide, again and again, to choose patience over aggression, mercy over vengeance, loyalty over convenience. That is not the same as instability. That is restraint, practiced so consistently it has become a kind of quiet strength most species could never sustain. Bryn's expression did not soften. And if that restraint fails, if our new alliance somehow becomes the reason it fails, then we will have learned the truth either way, Solon answered. Right now, we are afraid of a mystery, not a fact. Isolating them will not remove the danger you fear. It will only ensure we never understand it well enough to prepare for it properly. Fear built on old, incomplete data is exactly what nearly caused a war between our species and theirs already, when the Corvain tried to use our silence against us. The chamber fell quiet again, elders exchanging slow, thoughtful glances. Finally, Naira rose from her seat, addressing the full council rather than Solon directly. The council is divided, she said simply. Some believe as Bryn does, that caution now means distance, perhaps even quarantine, until we understand humanity more completely. Others believe as Solon does, that distance itself is the greater danger, allowing fear to grow unchecked in the absence of real understanding. She turned back to Solon, her expression softening only slightly. You have one final opportunity to settle this division. Return to Earth. Continue your work. If a true test arises, one that reveals humanity's nature under real pressure rather than simple observation, bring us clear evidence, not opinions shaped by personal gratitude toward a soldier who once protected you. Solon nodded slowly, accepting the weight of that responsibility fully. I understand. The chamber emptied slowly afterward, elders filing out in quiet groups, murmuring among themselves. Bryn lingered near the doorway, studying Solon carefully before speaking one final time. I hope you are right, he said, his voice quieter now, less guarded than before. For all our sakes, I truly hope you are right. But hope has never been a reliable defense against a species we do not yet understand. Solon watched him leave, then stood alone in the empty chamber for a long moment, thinking of Earth, of Petra's quiet loyalty, of Cass's careful warning about strength wrapped completely in restraint. That evening, aboard the ship preparing for departure back to Earth, Solon opened the journal one final time before the long journey home. The Council fears not humanity's strength, but its capacity to change, to escalate, and forgive in equal measure, following no predictable pattern we have yet discovered. I do not know if I can prove Bryn wrong. I only know that fear without understanding has already nearly cost us an alliance worth protecting. I return to Earth now, not simply as an observer, but as someone who must finally learn where their patience truly ends, before it is tested by something neither of our species can afford to survive. The return to Earth felt different from the first arrival. There was no rain this time, no crowd gathered along a rope line, no bright signs painted with welcoming words. Instead, the ship landed quietly at night, and Solon stepped down the ramp into cool, still air, carrying the full weight of the Council's decision resting on a single test still waiting to happen. Rosa met the ship alone, her expression tired but warm. We heard you were coming back. Petra's been asking about you every day. Solon smiled slightly at that, though the smile faded quickly as thoughts returned to Bryn Talus's warning, still echoing clearly from the Council chamber. A true test, one revealing humanity's nature under real pressure, was needed before the Alliance could move forward with confidence. Solon hoped quietly that such a test would never come, though some deeper instinct suggested otherwise. That instinct proved correct within days. A faction calling themselves the Free Voice, a small group of humans opposed to any alliance with outside species, had grown increasingly vocal in the weeks Solon had been away. Most dismissed them as a loud minority, harmless in their protests. That assumption changed suddenly when intelligence reports revealed the group had gained access to a decommissioned weapons facility near the site chosen for the final alliance signing ceremony, an event meant to formally welcome Earth into the wider galactic community. Petra arrived at Solon's temporary quarters early one morning, her expression grim, gear already fitted for immediate deployment. They're planning to disrupt the ceremony. Maybe worse. Command wants everyone with diplomatic ties moved to a secure location, but the ceremony itself can't be canceled without giving them exactly what they want, proof that fear works. Solon considered this carefully. What happens if it goes forward and something goes wrong? Then we handle it, Petra said simply. Like we handle everything else. The ceremony proceeded as planned, held in a wide public square rather than a heavily guarded compound, a deliberate choice made by human leadership to show confidence rather than fear. Solon stood near the front alongside several human officials, watching a crowd gather peacefully, unaware of the tension quietly coiled just beneath the surface of the event. The disruption came exactly at the moment officials began the formal signing, a sudden loud alarm followed by smoke rising from a device planted near the edge of the square. Panic rippled briefly through parts of the crowd, but human security teams moved instantly, calmly directing people away from the affected area with practiced efficiency. No shouting, no chaos, simply clear, controlled voices guiding everyone toward safety. Petra was already moving toward the source of the disruption, several other security officers close behind her. Solon, against every instinct toward self-preservation, followed as well, staying just behind the response team, watching closely, remembering Naira's instruction to bring back evidence, not assumptions. The Free Voice members responsible were found quickly, cornered near a maintenance entrance, clearly unprepared for how fast the response had come. There was a tense standoff, weapons raised on both sides for a brief, dangerous moment, the entire alliance seeming to balance on the edge of that single instant. Then, quietly, one of the security officers lowered her weapon first. "Nobody needs to get hurt today," she said calmly, her voice carrying clearly across the tense silence. "You've made your point. We heard you. Let's talk instead." The moment stretched painfully long before the Free Voice members slowly lowered their own weapons, surrendering without further incident. No shots fired, no lives lost. The entire confrontation resolved through calm, deliberate patience exactly when it mattered most, under real pressure, with real danger and real consequences waiting on either side of that decision. Solon stood frozen for a long moment afterward, processing what had just been witnessed. This was the true test, arriving unannounced, without warning, revealing exactly the answer the Council had been waiting for. Humans, even when directly threatened, even when given every justification to respond with overwhelming force, had chosen restraint first, again, exactly as they had every other time Solon had observed them under pressure. That evening, back in the quiet of the guest room, Solon opened the journal one final time, no longer writing as a cautious analyst gathering evidence for a divided council, but as someone who had finally found a clear, honest answer to a question carried across the stars for weeks. Today, humanity was tested directly, under real danger, during a moment that could have justified almost any response. They chose patience instead, exactly as they have chosen it every time before, not because they lacked the strength to do otherwise, but because restraint has become simply who they are, practiced so consistently it no longer requires conscious effort. I recommend, without hesitation now, full alliance status for Earth. Solon paused before writing the final lines, thinking back over the entire journey, from the first rainy welcome, through the archive detailing the Thren's quiet defeat, through Petra's instinctive protection during the outpost attack, through the Council's careful warnings, and finally to this last, decisive test resolved through nothing more than a single calm sentence spoken at exactly the right moment. "They were never meant to be feared," Solon wrote. "They were meant to be understood. I am glad I stayed long enough to understand them." Solon closed the journal gently and looked out the window at the quiet city beyond, lights glowing steadily against the darkening sky. Somewhere across that same city, Petra was likely already home, the day's danger already fading into an ordinary evening routine. Somewhere far above, the Council waited for a final report that would, at last, settle a mystery carried quietly across the galaxy for generations. Solon smiled faintly, setting the journal aside, knowing that whatever came next, humanity would face it exactly as they had faced everything else so far, calmly, deliberately, and, when it truly mattered most, with a patience far stronger than any weapon the galaxy had ever feared.